Hi, my name's Kayn, and I woke up alone in a hospital bed after surgery. No flowers, no family, not even a text. 2 weeks later, I found out my mom used my name, my credit, and my future to buy my sister a brand new Tesla. And the worst part? It wasn't a mistake. It was planned. They left me there, drugged, bleeding, and signed away. Like I was never supposed to know. Why does the golden child always get the car, the house, the love, while the quiet one gets erased? Let me tell you what they did next. The first thing I registered wasn't pain. It was silence. Not the quiet of a hospital room at night, but a stillness that felt intentional, heavy, cold. I blinked against the glare of fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. My throat was dry as sand. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I tried again. Still nothing. The room smelled like antiseptic and faded flowers, and as I turned my head, slow and mechanical, I saw the visitor chair tucked neatly in the corner. Empty. The curtain separating me from the hallway hung half-drawn, as if someone had pulled it aside, then changed their mind. No balloons, no notes, no familiar voices drifting in. My spine ached, but the chill in my chest hurt more. I pressed the call button, a soft beep. A nurse entered, young and brisk, clutching a clipboard. She seemed surprised I was awake. Her voice carried practiced kindness. She checked my vitals, adjusted the IV. "Glad to see you're up," she said. "That was a tough one. You've been under for a while." I nodded slowly. My mouth still too raw for questions, but my eyes must have asked them. "Your family was here," she added, almost as an afterthought. "They left a few hours after surgery, said they'd check back in a day or two." A smile lingered on her lips, but her tone was clipped, rehearsed, detached. I wasn't sure which part stung more, that they left, or that she clearly didn't expect them to return. When she left, the silence folded back around me like a heavy quilt. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the seams of the tiles. Memory flickered in pieces. The accident, a dark SUV, the screech of tires, then a stretcher, white lights, voices asking about insurance, and then blackness. Somewhere in that blur, I remembered my mother's hand on mine. Or maybe I imagined it. Maybe I needed to believe someone was there. The phone on the tray table blinked silently. No calls, no messages. Just a stale lock screen photo of the three of us. Me, my mother Vera, and my sister Callista, at some forced Thanksgiving years ago. I tapped into my messages. Nothing from them. Nothing since the night before surgery. The void on my phone mirrored the one in my chest. I turned toward the whiteboard next to the door, where nurses scribbled care notes. My eyes landed on a line in green marker. Expected visitors. Mom. Tuesday? The question mark burned more than the sentence itself. Was it a guess? A hopeful assumption? Did someone ask and get a shrug in response? I stared at that mark like it could explain something about how my life had arrived at this strange, lonely intersection. Later that evening, a night nurse came in to check on my mobility. As she helped me sit upright, she mentioned the security cameras in passing, said they caught an orderly sneaking extra breaks, which made me chuckle, briefly. "Do they have cameras in the waiting room too?" I asked, my voice scratchy. "Pretty much everywhere," she replied, "especially post-op zones. Liability and all." It stuck in my head all night. The next morning, I asked for access to the footage, citing patient rights, saying I'd like to know who signed my discharge paperwork. The staffer didn't argue. A few hours later, a hospital administrator arrived with a flash drive and a short explanation. "Per policy, patient-requested footage is available for review on-site only," she said. In a windowless office, I watched a grainy clip time-stamped the evening of my surgery. There they were, Vera and Callista, sitting in the waiting room, laughing. Callista sipped a latte and scrolled through her phone while Vera signed a form handed over by a nurse. Less than 45 minutes after I was wheeled in, they stood. My mother grabbed her purse. My sister adjusted her coat. They left. No hesitation. No second glances. Not even a nod to the nurse behind the desk. They left because they could. Back in my room, I sat in the silence again. But this time, it felt louder. I stared at the walls like they might answer for them. Was I inconvenient? Too messy? Too difficult to care for? Or worse, was I just replaceable? Maybe it wasn't that they didn't love me. Maybe they just loved comfort more. The ache in my body was one thing, but the ache of realizing the people who raised you are capable of that kind of cold calculation, that sticks deeper. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there, blinking at the ceiling tiles again, one by one. The next morning, a new face appeared. A hospital staffer, clipboard in hand, knocking lightly before stepping in. "Ms. Thorne? Sorry to bother you. Just here to verify some billing details. There were a few irregularities tied to your insurance profile, and we'd like to confirm something before final processing." "Billing?" I tilted my head. "What kind of irregularities?" He smiled gently, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just need to go over a few entries related to your payment source. Shouldn't take long." I nodded once, slowly, but deep down, something shifted. I couldn't know it then, but the real injury hadn't touched my spine. It had emptied my bank account. The knock on the door was soft but too deliberate to be casual. I looked up from the muted TV hanging near the ceiling, where some local news anchor droned about traffic and ice on the overpasses. It was still February. Still cold. "Ms. Thorne?" the man said. He was dressed in business casual, a badge clipped to his belt that read, "Patient Financial Services." Clipboard in hand, tablet under his arm, friendly face, the kind of professional smile that comes with training, not sincerity. "I won't take much of your time," he continued, stepping in. "Just need to verify a couple details on your billing records." I nodded slowly, trying to sit up straighter. "Sure." He tapped a few things on his screen, then cleared his throat. "We just need to confirm authorization on a partial payment of $65,118 made the morning after your surgery. It went through successfully, but the back end flagged a signature mismatch." I blinked. "What payment?" "The system shows it was paid via a credit account linked to your file," he said. "A joint line under the name Kayn Thorne, with a supplemental cardholder listed as Vera Thorne." The air in the room shifted. I didn't speak right away. He took that as confusion, kept going. "It appears the charge was processed using the authorized supplemental user's login. We just need your confirmation that this is accurate." "That card," I started and then stopped. My mouth felt suddenly dry. "That card was closed last year. Or, I thought it was." He gave a small nod, like he'd heard that before. "It's possible it was reopened under a temporary medical credit provision. That sometimes happens when a supplemental cardholder has access to the original application data." I didn't hear the next few sentences he said. My vision narrowed in on the word supplemental. I didn't remember authorizing anything. I certainly hadn't paid anything. I was in a morphine fog the morning after surgery, hooked up to IVs and monitors. He handed me a printout. The invoice was long, lines of itemized charges for the ambulance, imaging, anesthesia, post-op care. But it was the final page that twisted in my gut. Under signature on file, there it was. My name. Only it wasn't. I studied the loops and slants. It looked like mine from a distance. But my K was always closed at the top. This one swooped open like a backwards fishhook. The T in Thorne slashed across like someone in a hurry. My actual signature, the one I had scribbled on the intake form the day before surgery, was in the system too. And it didn't match. I looked at the address on the statement. It was my mother's house, the one I hadn't lived in for nearly 3 years. Where mail still sometimes showed up. Where she said she kept things safe. The man kept talking, explaining appeal procedures, disclaimers, the option to review things with insurance. I nodded, but I wasn't really listening anymore. That night, after he left, I lay awake under the dim ceiling lights and tried to reconstruct everything. What was the last clear memory I had before surgery? I remembered my mother leaning over the bed, brushing hair off my forehead, whispering, "Don't worry about the paperwork. Just focus on resting." She always used that tone, gentle, soothing, just enough to make you doubt your gut. Then, darkness. Somewhere between anesthesia and her voice, I slipped under and didn't come back for hours. Had she signed things while I was unconscious? Or brought the paperwork in knowing I'd nod along through the haze of pre-op meds? Maybe the signature wasn't even physical. Maybe she used old documents. I remembered once giving her power of attorney after a minor car accident 5 years ago. She said it was just in case. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and dialed the bank. The representative on the other end confirmed it. A new credit line had been activated using my name, with a supplemental card for Vera Thorne. The address? Same one from the invoice. "We see the initial charge," the agent said. "Would you like to file a fraud claim?" My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then I whispered, "I think. I need to." It wasn't just the money. It was the orchestration, the deliberate sequence of things. They hadn't reacted to an emergency. They planned for this. They waited until I was sedated, until I couldn't question, or deny, or revoke anything, and then they moved. The betrayal didn't come with a shout or a slap. It came with login credentials and access to my financial footprint. I thought of Callista, her Tesla, her sparkling Instagram posts. I thought of Vera's hand on my arm before surgery. How warm it had felt in the moment. How cold it was now in memory. Later that night, I checked my hospital email portal. There was one unread message, forwarded internally from billing. Subject line, Payment authorization, signed on behalf of Kayn Thorne. I clicked it and saw the signature. Mine, only it wasn't. Discharge took less than 10 minutes. A nurse wheeled me to the curb, handed me a folder thick with instructions, and offered a flat, polite smile before disappearing back through the automatic doors. I sat there for a moment, clutching the envelope like it might morph into a plan. My bag was already on my lap. My coat still carried the smell of hospital-grade detergent, and no one was coming. I tried calling my mother again, straight to voicemail. Russell, my father, didn't pick up either. His line rang until it cut off with a mechanical beep. I opened Instagram without thinking. The first photo on my feed? Callista, smiling wide, holding a paper cup from her favorite cafe. Her caption, "Starting the weekend off right. Show self-care, Shotcher's grateful." I booked a rideshare. The driver didn't speak, which I was grateful for. His car smelled like mint gum and dashboard heat. Outside the window, Cincinnati passed in gray layers. Melting snow formed patches on the sidewalks, blending into the gutters like old bruises. I stared straight ahead, holding the folder tighter, like it might anchor me to something that still made sense. When we pulled into the driveway of the house I used to call home, I felt nothing. No rush of comfort, no pang of familiarity. Just the dull thud of doors I knew too well. The lawn was patchy with thaw, the shrubs trimmed just enough to give off the illusion of care. And there it was, Callista's Tesla, sleek and smug in the driveway. Silver gray, spotless, not a fingerprint on it. I stepped out slowly, legs still aching. The driver pulled away without a word. I stared at the front door for a full minute before I moved. No wreath, no sign of activity. I rang the bell, waited, rang again. Nothing. I pulled out my phone and texted Vera. "I'm outside." The reply came faster than I expected. 4 words. "Can't host right now. Sorry." A second message followed. "Your sister is resting. Please understand." My fingers clenched around the phone. I looked down at my abdomen, bandages still tight, painkillers still coursing through my system, and then back at the front door. A place I wasn't allowed in anymore. A house where I had once helped install the kitchen backsplash. I noticed a folded square tucked behind the screen. A sticky note, half fluttering in the breeze. My name was written across the top in Vera's loopy cursive. "Stay with a friend. We're a little full here. You'll figure it out." A small heart at the end. As if that softened anything. I sat down on the porch steps, pulled out my phone again, not knowing what I was looking for. Maybe old texts, maybe something that would make it all feel less insane. And then I opened the family group chat. It had been quiet on my end for weeks. I scrolled back. Nothing about my surgery. No check-ins. No how's recovery. Not even a joke or meme. Then I saw it. Dated 4 days ago. Callista. Don't tell her about this weekend. She always brings tension. Vera. Agreed. She's always too sensitive. That word again. Sensitive. Their favorite weapon. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered for a second, then hit screenshot. I saved it without even knowing why. I texted again. I'm outside with stitches and no place to sleep. Read. No reply. Just the little gray scene stamp. Clean. Final. I pushed myself up, wincing. Dragged my suitcase across the porch and down the walkway, step by step, heart thudding with something that wasn't surprise anymore. It was recognition. This wasn't new. This wasn't sudden. I remembered birthdays where I got text messages instead of calls. Holidays where I set the table while Callista took selfies with the turkey. Conversations that turned into competitions I never asked for. Their silence wasn't accidental. It was architectural, designed, planned. Maybe I'd always been the placeholder, the girl on the sidelines, the just-in-case daughter. At the end of the block, I sat on the stone edge near the corner stop sign. The air was colder now. My hands shook, not from the wind, but from something deeper. I wanted to scream, but my voice stayed where it was. Buried. My phone buzzed. A voice message from a number I didn't recognize. 7 words. You need to see what I found. I hit play, because by then, I had nothing left to lose. The voicemail wasn't a mistake. The moment I played it, I knew that voice. Jenna Myers. A woman I hadn't seen since the early days at the marketing firm, where I used to run coffee orders instead of campaigns. Her voice came through low, almost like she was whispering in a church. Kayn, I don't know if this is something you want to see, but I think you need to. Attached was a link. No message beyond that. No context. Just a string of numbers and letters that led me to a video already racking up comments. I was sitting cross-legged on a borrowed air mattress in Becca's spare room, still wearing sweatpants from the hospital. The blinds were drawn halfway, filtering in the kind of pale light that makes everything look overexposed. I tapped the link. It took a second to load. Then it began. Callista, radiant as ever, stood in our mother's driveway. Her hair perfectly curled, a slouchy designer sweater hanging effortlessly from one shoulder. Behind her was a brand new Tesla, silver, gleaming, with a red ribbon tied in an elaborate bow across the hood. She laughed, tossed her hair back, and looked directly into the camera. When your parents believe in you, she said sweetly, this is what happens. The caption read, Gifted, not entitled, grind pays off family love. It wasn't a joke. I felt my jaw tighten as she blew a kiss to the camera and opened the door like she was unveiling a trophy. The hood caught the light and reflected it into the lens with a kind of smugness I didn't know metal could convey. I reached for my water bottle with a hand I hadn't realized was shaking. The video kept playing. She leaned into the driver's seat, panned across the touchscreen, and added, This is what hard work gets you. Hard work? I stared at the screen, a mix of heat and numbness crawling up my arms. My chest constricted, not from pain, but from something deeper. That car, that exact model, it was just over 65 grand, practically identical to my hospital bill. I rewound the video, just to be sure. The comments made it worse. Your parents are actual goals. Hard work looks good on you, Queen. Bet your sister's fuming right now, LOL. One caught my eye. Didn't her sister just come out of surgery? Bit odd timing. Another reply. She's just bitter she didn't get the car. Some people can't handle watching others succeed. I turned the volume down, but the words were already echoing. I opened a text thread I hadn't touched in over a week and typed, Did you use my hospital money to buy Callista a Tesla? Message sent. Delivered. Read. No reply. I called Vera. Straight to voicemail. I sent another text. I know what you did. This time, one word came back. Enough. I stared at it for a long time. Enough? Enough of what? Enough of me asking for the truth? Enough of pretending we were still some functioning unit of a family? I sat there, in that room I didn't own, with my knees pulled up and the blanket tucked under my chin. My stomach had turned in on itself. I couldn't even summon the energy to cry. My heart had hit the part of grief that doesn't wail. It just goes quiet. They didn't just take from me. They didn't just empty my bank account and walk out of that hospital. They redirected my pain into a press release. They packaged it, wrapped it with a bow, and handed it to my sister like a prize. As if I were the debt and she was the dividend. I scrolled back to the video, paused it at the moment where she held the keys up like a game show winner. A comment stood out from the sea of praise. Wait, isn't that your sister's full name etched on the fob? I zoomed in. It was. But the billing address tied to that car? It was mine. I had spent the last 2 days in a quiet I didn't choose. No yelling, no crying. Just this aching stillness. But now, sitting cross-legged on the thin mattress in the corner of Becca's studio, the silence finally turned into clarity. My laptop screen glowed beside me, casting long shadows against the wall. On one side of the screen, my hospital invoice, line by line, all $65,000 in change. On the other, a Tesla configurator page that Callista had once bragged about using. Same model, same custom trim, nearly the same price. $64,900. Dollar for dollar. It wasn't rage that made my hands shake. It was recognition. This wasn't a mistake. This was math. I picked up my phone and dialed Vera again. This time, it rang longer before she answered. Kayn, she said, as if surprised I still existed. There was a pause. I didn't fill it. You're obsessing, she finally added. This is becoming unhealthy. You always twist things into something bigger. You didn't just take from me, I said evenly. You gave it to her. Silence. Then she exhaled into the phone, like she'd been holding in an irritation she didn't want to admit. You should be grateful we helped you at all, she said. You're 30, Kayn. Most people your age don't need their mothers to pick up after them. You've never exactly made responsible choices. My chest tightened, but I stayed quiet. I waited. This is what happens, she continued, when you don't plan ahead. Life gets messy. That's not our fault. I let the pause stretch longer this time. You did plan ahead, I said at last. You just planned it for someone else. I hung up before she could respond. I set the phone down beside the laptop and leaned back against the wall, letting the cold of the drywall ground me. There wasn't any room to scream. The ceiling was too low, the air too thin. My eyes drifted to a corner of the room, where the duffel bag I hadn't unpacked sat untouched. I thought of that first college tour 10 years ago. I'd ridden the city bus for 2 hours to get to the campus. Callista had gotten a surprise visit from Vera, with lunch, flowers, a tour guide she'd arranged ahead of time. I didn't even get a phone call until 3 days later. Back then, I told myself it was forgetfulness, that Mom had too much on her plate, that she'd meant to call, but something came up. I made excuses because that's what people do when they still believe in what's supposed to be. I opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out a faded manila folder. Inside were old documents, college financial aid papers, copies of old tax forms, and a printout of my first bank account application. I flipped to the page with my signature. There it was, neat and nervous, signed at 18. And beneath it, in blue ink, joint access granted to Vera Thorne. Just in case, she had said. I shut the folder. No more just in case. I stood up, grabbed the tape roll, and started printing. One invoice after another, each one labeled, highlighted, annotated. I taped them to the wall in rows, watching the paper curl slightly at the corners. Red ink circled the transactions that tied back to me. The car payment, the hospital charge, the reactivated credit line. They chose. Now I would. The next part came easier than I expected. I moved slowly, methodically, like I was prepping a case file, not mourning a family. I wasn't sure when I'd crossed that line, but I wasn't interested in stepping back over it. I sat down again, the floor cool against my legs. The cursor blinked on a new browser tab. I typed, Civil Attorney, Identity Fraud, Hamilton County. The first listing had a name I recognized. I clicked it. Because what else could I lose? The email came through while I was brushing my teeth with one hand and holding my phone in the other. The subject line read, Congratulations on listing your home. At first, I thought it was spam, something generic from Zillow or Redfin. But then I saw the address. My address. The condo. The one Vera and I had co-signed for 5 years ago. The one I'd been sending checks toward every month until last year, when I moved out and she promised to manage the paperwork until we decided what to do with it. I clicked the link. There it was. My old front door, my tile backsplash, the mismatched door handles I had replaced myself. The kitchen still had the hanging pot rack I installed with a borrowed drill. Listing price, $297,000. Seller, V. Thorne. My name wasn't in the contact section, but it was buried in the fine print. Recorded owner, Kayn Thorne. I sat down slowly, toothbrush still foaming in my mouth, as I opened another tab and searched the county assessor's portal. I entered the parcel number. A new document had been submitted just last week. A listing agreement with my name digitally signed at the bottom. Only, I hadn't signed anything. The signature was too perfect, too sharp, like someone had lifted it from a scan. My stomach turned. I knew exactly where it came from, my hospital intake file. I'd signed dozens of forms while groggy, just trying to get through pre-op, and she'd kept every copy. I bet she had them all in some drawer, neatly filed, waiting for the right moment to pretend I was participating. I called her. I didn't even hesitate. Kayn, Vera answered, as calm as if I'd asked her what time it was. Why is the condo listed? There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough for her to choose a tone. I thought it was better to liquidate, she said. You don't need the stress of owning something right now, sweetheart. I nearly dropped the phone. That was the last thing I had my name on. Her voice didn't waver. Names change, so do roles. You're moving forward now, aren't you? This frees you. The coldness in her phrasing was surgical, not even cruel, just methodical. I ended the call without another word. For a moment, I stood still in the middle of the apartment. Then I moved, fast, frantic, not in panic, but precision. I pulled up everything I had, purchase documents, co-signer agreements, text messages where she swore nothing would be done without your say-so. I printed them all. Then I opened my contacts and started deleting. Vera. Gone. Russell. Gone. Every cousin who hadn't reached out since the hospital. Gone. But I left one voicemail intact, the one Callista left me a year ago after a screaming match over Christmas dinner. She'd accused me of ruining Mom's mood. I'd said something back I can't remember. But the voicemail she left afterward? If this ever ends up in court, remember who started it. I saved it in 3 folders. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. The air still carried the chill of early March. Inside, a clerk helped me pull up deed history and signature verification logs. I handed over the documents I brought. They compared them to the digital file on record. She looked at me and said, "These weren't filed by you. I mean, the name matches, but this isn't your IP. This was filed from her home Wi-Fi." Later that afternoon, I met with a friend from law school. He owed me a favor. After looking through everything, he nodded. "You've got something solid. Signature misuse, misrepresentation of interest, potentially even coercion if she used any of your medical documents. You've got grounds." I exhaled slowly. Not in relief, but in preparation. I printed a cease and desist, signed it with my own pen, deliberately slow, I stapled the documents, slid them into a legal envelope, and drove straight to the courthouse. The mail slot was halfway down a dim corridor. No one was around. No fanfare, no audience. Just me, dropping the envelope into the slot, like closing the door on a chapter I hadn't written, but was finally rewriting. On my way out, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Callista had just posted. New house vibes. In the background of the photo, my old bedroom lamp, still scratched from when I dropped it during finals week. She smiled at the camera like nothing had happened. The envelope from the credit union was nondescript. Plain white, windowed, tucked between two pizza coupons in the mailbox downstairs. If I hadn't opened it, if I'd just tossed it aside like junk, I wouldn't have seen the words printed in sharp black ink across the top. Delinquency notice. Vehicle loan account in the name of Kayn Thorne. Vehicle loan? I never applied for a loan, let alone for a car I never drove. I sat down at the kitchen counter, knees suddenly unsteady, and spread the letter flat. There it was. My name, my address, and a loan amount that matched the Tesla's sticker price to the dollar. I didn't need to guess. I knew exactly whose keys were sitting in that driveway, still warm from Callista's photo op. I pulled up the vehicle registration database online, dug through the listings until I found it. The VIN matched. The vehicle? Registered under Callista Vera Thorne, with me listed as co-owner. My address, my digital signature, a side note in the listing. Family transfer, signature assumed. Assumed? Like consent could be faked into being. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I began printing. Later that afternoon, I walked into the credit union branch I used to use back when I still believed in joint accounts. The woman behind the glass counter greeted me politely, asked for ID, and disappeared into the back after I explained the problem. She returned with a file. "Looks like this was processed through a pre-existing joint credit file," she said. "Do you remember ever granting someone access to this account?" I almost laughed. 5 years ago, maybe longer, it was closed. Well, it was reactivated under medical hardship. She tapped the paper. Here's the signature we received. It was mine, lifted straight from old medical paperwork. Probably the same scan Vera had used to authorize the hospital payment. "Would you like to initiate a misrepresentation claim?" she asked gently. I nodded. Yes, immediately. On the drive home, I didn't play music. I didn't need noise. I needed room to think, to remember. And as the memories returned, they weren't flashes. They were threads. There was the time I covered a utility bill Callista couldn't manage, back when she had just moved into her starter apartment. Vera had called it a family favor. "You're working. She's still finding her feet." I remembered the exact words Callista had used that night, when I questioned why the charge had gone through on my card without warning. "What's yours is partly ours, right?" I used to laugh at that. I thought it was her way of being playful, generous. Turns out, it was just honest. Back at the apartment, I grabbed a new folder from the stack and labeled it in bold black marker. Personal misuse. Verified. Inside, I began to build. Screenshots of the Tesla post, the credit union documents, archived texts, an email from Vera about just handling some logistics while I was still in post-op. Every page went into a stack. Every timestamp had its own annotation. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. I'd already done that. This was about creating a paper trail. Something cold and clear. Something stronger than hurt feelings. It was late, well past midnight, when my phone buzzed with a new message. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I opened it, the voice message clicked into place before the woman finished saying her name. "Hey, it's Rachel, from back in undergrad. Listen, I just remembered something." I listened. "Remember when you paid for Callista's emergency dental bill in 2017? She said she didn't have a card that worked and asked if she could just use yours for a day or two." I remembered. Barely. I hadn't thought about that moment in years. Well, she told me you had given her permission to open a line in your name, said it was all agreed to, and that you'd never check. My chest went still. Rachel added, I don't know if it helps now, but I thought you should know. I didn't respond. I pulled out the old dental receipt from a storage box I hadn't opened in months. The charge was still linked to an open line, under my name. She never closed it. I sat down again and added a new document to the folder, labeled it Exhibit C. Before I could stand, another message came through, this time from Vera. You're tearing the family apart, Kayn. I stared at it. No punctuation, no apology, just blame. I didn't reply. I just opened a blank email. To Desmond. I hovered over the send button for 2 full minutes. Not because I was second-guessing anything. There was no part of me left that needed permission, but because I understood exactly what pressing it meant. And then I clicked. Subject: Family fraud, personal identity misuse. To Desmond Carter. I didn't add a greeting or closing, just the folder. 72 pages of financial records, screen captures, notarized history, timeline notes, and one label across the top of the PDF, Exhibit Packet A. By the time the email went out, it was already dark outside. The hum of traffic on the street below faded into the background as I sat still for the first time in hours. A new kind of stillness, not the silence of being dismissed, but the quiet that comes after taking control. The next day, I drove to Desmond's office in downtown Cincinnati. I hadn't seen him in person since before the pandemic, and even then, our last interaction had been short, awkward. But when he opened the door, he didn't offer small talk. He just waved me in. Books lined the walls, legal pads stacked beside coffee mugs. Everything smelled like paper and peppermint. He sat, opened his laptop, and clicked the folder without saying a word. I watched his face closely, how his eyes narrowed, how his mouth pressed into a line. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Still no words. Finally, he looked up. This isn't just negligence, he said. It's patterned identity exploitation. I exhaled like I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath for weeks. Desmond leaned back, tapping his pen slowly against the desk. You know Lacey Cordell? I blinked. She dated Callista in college. Why? She filed a fraud complaint in 2018. It got dropped for lack of evidence, but guess whose name was on the application? I stared. Mine. He nodded. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The pieces were assembling themselves, faster than I could sort them. Desmond reached into his drawer and pulled out a manila folder labeled L. Cordell, closed file. He slid it across the desk. Later that afternoon, I called Lacey. Her voice was calm, detached. Not angry, just done. She used your name because your credit was better, Lacey said. She told me, Kayn won't find out. She doesn't check these things. And honestly, she sounded so confident I believed her. She agreed to write a statement, signed, dated, witnessed. Back at the apartment, Desmond and I drafted the formal complaint. Identity fraud, unauthorized use of credit, financial misrepresentation. We included Lacey's statement, mine, the documentation trail, and a request for full financial reconciliation. It was clinical, airtight. I signed the affidavit slowly, my pen dragging across the signature line like a deliberate insult to every document Callista had ever forged. We didn't send it right away. Instead, I went home and made a post. Simple, private. Sometimes silence is survival, but now it's accountability. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't need to. People knew. That was the thing about growing up in a family that loved image more than truth. Once the image cracked, the truth poured out from all the people who were too afraid to speak before. That night, my inbox filled with messages. Old coworkers, high school classmates, distant cousins, all sharing stories of small things that now made sense. Callista's unpaid deposits, mysterious bills, odd texts asking to use someone's account just for a day. They didn't want to get involved, but they wanted me to know I wasn't imagining this. The next morning, I opened Instagram. Callista had gone live. Her face was tight with forced emotion, lips trembling just enough to look believable. "I'm being attacked," she said to her followers, "by people who don't even know me, people who just want to tear me down. Jealousy is real, but I know my truth." I watched, unmoved. Her voice trembled, but not from tears, because she knew I wasn't done. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing, again and again, like it had something urgent to say. The screen lit up with notifications, texts, DMs, missed calls. One message sat at the top, blinking from Becca. "She went live. You need to see this." I sat up slowly, my heart already ahead of my breath. I clicked the link without thinking. The video opened with Callista's face, broadcast from her phone camera, framed just right in the soft glow of her bedroom ring light. Her voice quivered as she addressed her audience. "I'm being harassed," she said, her eyes wide, her mouth twisted with practiced hurt. "People are making up lies about me, saying I stole, that I used someone else's money. I didn't. I didn't even know the Tesla was in her name until days later." Her voice cracked on "stole," and she wiped at her eye like something had almost escaped it. But behind her, behind the mascara, the moaning about betrayal, sat a lamp. My lamp. A ceramic base, scuffed on one side from when I knocked it over during finals week sophomore year. It had a shade that was slightly crooked no matter how you turned it. And there it was, on her dresser, glowing faintly like it had no idea it was now part of a lie. The comments scrolled faster than I could read. At first, it was the usual support. "You don't deserve this. Block the haters. They're jealous of your shine, girl." But then the questions came. "Wait, isn't that Kaylyn's lamp? She said she didn't know about the Tesla, but wasn't the car in her driveway before Kaylyn left the hospital? This doesn't add up." The feed went dark shortly after that. She deleted the live. But by then, it had already been screen recorded and reposted. By lunch, another video was circulating. Vera at church, giving a speech to the youth group. I didn't go looking for it. Someone sent it to me anonymously, captioned only with, "You should know what she said." The clip started mid-sentence. "After all I gave her, after all I sacrificed, my youngest turned on me, took what we built and dragged it through court. That's the kind of person she's become." Applause followed, sparse, hesitant. I watched the whole thing in silence. My face didn't move. I felt nothing, just hollow. Later that week, I walked through Findlay Market, grabbing bread and tea. The vendors nodded politely, but one woman did a double take, then another. Two teens whispered to each other and pointed. I caught snippets. "That's her?" And "the lawsuit girl." I passed an old teacher from high school, Ms. Reynolds. She didn't speak, but she held my gaze for a long moment. Her eyes were soft, and her mouth tightened like she was choosing not to say something. She gave a quiet nod and walked on. That nod did something strange to me. At home, a message waited in my inbox. "Hey, Kaylyn, I don't know if you remember me. Tina from Callista's Pilates class? I just wanted to say, she told us a lot of things about you, that you were unstable, that you made things up for attention, but none of this makes sense now. I'm sorry I believed it." I stared at her message for a long time before replying. "Thank you for saying that. The truth doesn't always change people, but sometimes it rearranges the furniture in their minds, just enough to make room for doubt. And doubt spreads fast. That weekend, Callista's follower count dropped by nearly 2,000. One by one, relatives stopped engaging with her posts. A neighbor reposted the civil filing I'd submitted. No comment, just the link. A quiet signal of shifting allegiance. Desmond emailed later that afternoon. "Discovery phase just got easier." I didn't respond right away. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about what silence had cost me and what it had spared me from. Maybe you don't have to shout the truth. Maybe you just have to show it. I took a photo of one page from the hospital file, the one with the fake signature next to mine. I circled it in red ink and posted it to my profile. Caption: She said I was lying. I just needed them to see what the truth looked like. The post went up at 5:34 p.m. At 7:12, the mail arrived. A single envelope. From Vera. The envelope was thick, certified, and came with a hollow knock on my apartment door. I signed for it without looking the courier in the eye. Back inside, I sat on the floor beside the space heater and stared at my name typed in all caps on the front of the court summons. Hamilton County Civil Division. Trial date, April 11th. I folded the letter back into its envelope, pressed the seal shut with both hands, and exhaled slowly. No more maybe. No more hoping someone would do the right thing. Now it would be written, read aloud, entered into record. The morning of the hearing, Cincinnati felt colder than usual for mid-April. Desmond met me outside the courthouse in his usual navy wool coat, briefcase in one hand, coffee in the other. He didn't offer platitudes, just a nod, and then we walked in together. Vera was already seated at the defense table. Pearls around her neck, hair pinned back, mouth tight with controlled panic. Callista sat beside her, flipping through her phone like this was traffic court, not a civil lawsuit that could gut their savings and whatever was left of their image. The judge entered, and the courtroom stood. I didn't tremble. The proceedings moved quickly. Desmond stood and read the summary aloud. Allegations of identity misuse, misappropriation of jointly held property, emotional and financial damages. The judge glanced over at me briefly, and I met his eyes. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Then Desmond started the walkthrough. Hospital documents, shown, digital records, submitted, vehicle loan applications, highlighted. He brought up screenshots from Callista's livestream, showing the lamp, the invoice, the key fob with my name. The courtroom remained silent, except for the clicking of his remote. Finally, Desmond pulled out Lacey Cordell's written statement. Signed. Dated. Witnessed. He read it aloud. She used Kaylyn's name because her credit was better. Said Kaylyn wouldn't find out. Said, quote, "It's not stealing if she never checks." The room shifted. The air changed. Vera turned her head slightly. Callista didn't look up. When it was my turn to speak, I stood without hesitating. "I didn't want this," I said, "but I'm not here to be wanted. I'm here to be heard." I talked for 5 minutes. Nothing dramatic, no theatrics, just the facts. How I'd woken up in a hospital room alone, how the car and the condo had been transferred behind my back, how years of being told I was too sensitive led to this moment. I finished with one sentence. They always said family comes first. I just didn't know that meant before me. The judge requested a brief recess. When we returned, the verdict came quickly. In favor of the plaintiff, Kaylyn Thorne, damages totaling $74,000 to be repaid in full. The gavel dropped like a punctuation mark. Vera gasped softly. Callista leaned toward her and whispered something, then looked at me and said under her breath, "You ruined us." I turned to face her fully. "No," I replied. "You did that yourselves." I didn't wait for their reaction. I picked up my bag, nodded to Desmond, and left the courtroom without looking back. That night, as I sipped tea and tried to unwind, I got a notification. Vera had posted on Facebook. It was a letter, long, passive-aggressive, and dripping with pity. We raised her, we sacrificed, we gave, and now she sues her own blood for attention. I won't say more, but the truth will always find its way. The comments split within hours. Some poured in to defend her, calling me selfish, ungrateful. But others, many more, began to ask questions. Screenshots appeared. Reposts of the court summary. One person simply commented, "This is what gaslighting looks like." I didn't reply. Not then. Not ever. A few days later, I found myself walking past the courthouse again, not for any reason. I think I just needed to see it from the outside, to prove to myself that it was real, that the hearing had happened, and I wasn't imagining how heavy silence used to feel. Across the street, a man stood leaning against a mailbox. A neighbor from my old building. We made eye contact for half a second. He didn't wave, but he didn't look away either. And somehow, that was enough. Later that evening, I went through my contacts again. Vera's name was still there. I hovered over the delete option for a second, then tapped it. Gone. But I didn't delete the voicemail, the one Callista left after our last real fight. I tucked it into a folder on my phone titled, For Records Only. Not for revenge, I whispered to the empty room. Just for memory. The envelope was pale yellow, smudged at the corners, like someone had held it too tight for too long. No return address. Just my full name, written in handwriting I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. The script slanted to the right, each letter curved deliberately, like it was trying too hard to appear calm. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the morning light cutting across the floor tiles, and stared at it. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the counter and poured a cup of coffee. Then I moved it to the edge of the table and sat across from it, like I was waiting for it to say something first. Eventually, I slid my finger under the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. You always needed too much. That was the first line. No greeting, no apology, just a judgment. One that felt old, practiced, like she'd been writing it in her head for years. The sentences that followed weren't any softer. You were born already wanting more than I could give. Callista didn't cry as much. There were days I asked myself what I'd done wrong. Maybe I would have been better off with one daughter. My eyes stayed on the page. I didn't blink. I read every word, each one more of a wound than the last. It wasn't the cruelty that stunned me. It was the precision. This wasn't venting. It was a script. One she'd been rehearsing behind smiles, Christmas dinners, and polite texts that always ended in periods instead of exclamation points. I thought back to the summer I turned 12. She'd forgotten to pick me up from day camp. The counselors waited almost an hour before someone reached her. When she finally arrived, makeup intact, she wasn't even flustered. You were supposed to remind me, she said in the car, like it was my job to manage her memory. I remembered thinking it made sense. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I had failed her. But now, years later, with her words printed in black ink, I realized it had never been forgetfulness. It was training. She was teaching me early that my needs were inconvenient, that my existence required justification. I folded the letter back along its original crease and slid it into a file folder marked, For When I Forget. Not for revenge, not even for proof. Just to remind myself of who she chose to be when no one was watching. The apartment was quiet, the heater clicking gently as it adjusted to the spring chill. I looked around at the life I was rebuilding. Not perfect, not polished, but mine. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Kayn, said the voice, hesitant but familiar. It's Marlon, my uncle, Vera's brother, the one who always stayed out of things. I heard about the letter, he said. I heard what she wrote. I didn't say anything. I want you to know, some of us saw it. We just didn't speak up. I leaned back into the couch, staring at the ceiling. You should have, I said. There was a pause. A long one. You're right, he replied. And I'm sorry. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't offer excuses. Just that. And oddly, that did more for me than the letter ever could have. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I didn't scream. I placed the letter in my desk drawer, beside documents that marked the legal end of a version of my family I used to believe in. The lamp flickered once, the kind of flicker you don't notice unless you're alone and paying attention. And I was. The apartment fell back into silence. That night, I dreamed I was at a dinner table, and for once, they waited for me before they started eating. The rejection letter arrived on a Wednesday. Plain white envelope. No drama, no apology. Just the words, "We regret to inform you. followed by a reference to my damaged credit history and a single phrase that landed like a punch. Unresolved vehicle loan. I didn't cry. Not this time. I set the letter aside and rinsed out my coffee mug, the ceramic one with the chip on the handle that I'd started using just to feel something breakable in my hands. Outside, the first real warmth of summer pressed against the windows. People walked past with iced drinks and tank tops, while I stood barefoot on cold tile, realizing, again, that even the future I had planned had been quietly auctioned off behind my back. Later that afternoon, I met with a counselor at a nonprofit that helped women rebuild after financial abuse. I told her everything, not the dramatic version, just the facts. Hospital debt, reopened accounts, fraudulent co-signatures, my sister's car title. She didn't flinch. By the end of our session, I had the beginnings of a credit repair plan, a checklist for loan rehabilitation, and, most shocking of all, a brand new savings account. In only my name. No emergency contact, no shared access, no just-in-case clause. Just me. I walked out with a sense of quiet ownership I hadn't felt since my first apartment. And even then, it was rented under my mother's lease, for paperwork convenience. The next week, I moved into a new place, still in Cincinnati, but farther from the neighborhoods where the silence grew. This time, I brought only what I owned. No hand-me-downs. No borrowed chairs or repainted side tables from Vera's garage. I bought a digital keypad for the front door, installed it myself with a borrowed drill and YouTube instructions. When the screen lit up and accepted my code, I smiled. No keys to copy, I said aloud to no one. A few days later, I found myself driving past the old house, the one Vera tried to sell out from under me. It was listed again. The sign had a different realtor's name on it, and the price had dropped. I slowed at the curb, rolled down the window just enough to catch the faint scent of overgrown hedges and mildew from the gutters. I didn't stop. Closure, I've learned, isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's just not turning in the driveway anymore. Back at the new apartment, I unpacked the last box, labeled MISC in thick marker. Inside was the lamp, a replica of the one Callista had taken when she moved out of our shared dorm. I'd found it online 6 months ago and ordered it without thinking. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough. I placed it on the desk near the window, where the morning light would hit it just right. Next to it, in a plain envelope, sat Vera's last letter. Unopened. Unread. I didn't throw it away. I didn't need to reread pain to remember it. But I kept it, like a scar that had long since healed over, but still knew where it lived. That evening, Desmond texted, "Still thinking about the documentary?" I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "Maybe, not out of spite. Just to make sure no one thinks they're alone." The next morning, I sat on the porch with my coffee, watching the city wake up around me. No arguments, no betrayal, just the hum of traffic and the distant bark of a dog I didn't know. I sipped slowly and looked up at a sky so clean it almost looked new. They took money. They took silence. But they never took my voice. I just hadn't used it yet. If you've ever felt invisible to your own family, this is for you. Maybe your story isn't like mine. Maybe your family never drained your bank account or stole your name. But if you've ever sat quietly at a dinner table, wondering how love could feel so conditional, then you understand more than you think. We talk a lot about loyalty in families, but loyalty without respect? Without boundaries? That's not family. That's a performance. And for too long, I played my role. The quiet one, the helper, the one who didn't make things harder. I gave silence the benefit of the doubt, but silence is not always peace. Sometimes speaking up isn't about revenge, it's about reclaiming space, reclaiming your name, your voice, your right to exist without permission. If you're watching this and feeling that same hollow ache I once did, hear me clearly. You are not dramatic. You are not selfish. And you are not alone. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself? Have you ever been told you're too sensitive just for asking to be treated fairly? Let me know in the comments. Type a 1 if this story touched something in you. Tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's out there. And if you didn't connect with it, I want to hear that too. What did it make you think of? If this video meant something to you, please consider subscribing to the channel. We've got more stories, real, raw, and meant for people like you, coming every week. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this channel sees you. Until next time.